I still remember standing at my grandmother's old gate only to be handed a trespass notice with my own name misspelled. Karen, flanked by her HOA board, called me an intruder before neighbors at the flagpole like I was a stranger on my own street. Then, the county record surfaced the deed with her embossed seal. The injunction stamped in fresh ink, slicing their bluff clean in two, and silence followed. Let me take you back to where humiliation began before justice found its footing. The gravel beyond Grandma's limestone gate still held the warmth of the afternoon when the HOA finally made it official. Dale unlatched a clipboard, cleared his throat like he'd practiced in a bathroom mirror, and said, "Sir, you are being served." Karen stood beside him in sunglasses big enough to shade a lie. The paper in Dale's hand caught the sun and flashed like a cheap badge. I held my thermos and didn't move. The spoon inside tapped the metal, one soft, steady clink before I said a word. "On what grounds?" I asked. "Unlawful presence," Karen replied. "Trespassing on HOA managed property, pending corrective action." She pitched her voice for the neighbors peeking over hedges. I could hear the church choir 2 blocks over warming up Scales' soft ahs, braided with leaves skittering along the curb. "This is my grandmother's house," I said. "You know that." Karen smiled a secretary's smile. "Ownership is subject to covenants." "Mr. Colton," I said. "Ray." Dale lifted the form, angling it so the phone in my shirt pocket would catch it. "Notice of trespass," he read. "Issued under revised setback guidance. Revised when I asked." "Last weekend," Karen said. "Ratified by the board." Monday. I looked at the gate, old iron flaking where Grandma's hand once rested to work the latch. Beyond it, the walk curved under oaks toward the front steps that rose like a hymn. Historic mansion, the county had called it when they put up the little bronze plaque 15 years back. To me, it was just the house where Grandma taught me to fold a letter straight and measure twice. "Step away from the gate, please," Dale said. "We can't have you interfering with a compliance inspection." "Interfering with my own yard," I said. "That's a new trick." He held the paper toward me. The seal at the bottom was a poor photocopy, a gray ring of almost authority. "Sign to acknowledge receipt," he said. "I'll photograph to acknowledge receipt," I said, lifting my phone. The shutter sound clicked. I took one of the heading, one of the middle one tight on the signature line where Karen had signed K. Billingsworth President with a flourish that looked almost like pride. Behind them, 2 neighbors slowed their walk. One whispered, "Is that the Colton place?" The other louder, "I heard there's trouble with the boundary." Trouble liked an audience. Karen loved one. "You are on improper presence," Karen declared, voice bright enough for the bulletin board at Colton's grill. "You'll vacate until we conclude our inspection." "I'm inside the fence line," I said. "We can measure it if you'd like." "We already have," she said. "Your outbuilding straddles setback by nearly 2 feet." "Your outbuilding," Dale echoed as if discovering a crime. I unscrewed the thermos cap and took a sip. The coffee had cooled, but it still carried the diner's burnt sugar comfort. "You folks ever notice how paper printed on Saturday gets heavy by Monday?" I asked. "Like it soaked up intentions." Karen lifted her sunglasses long enough to let me see her eyes. "Sir, I suggest you cooperate. We can escalate this." "Escalate," I repeated, rolling the word on my tongue until it went tasteless. "Or we can proceed." Dale, sensing his cue, leaned past the gate an inch, shoes crunching gravel just inside the line. I raised my phone and his heel crept back to the public side like a child caught with a cookie. The choir's notes drifted higher and a leaf pressed itself to the iron like a stamp. He started to read again. "Under Article Hold," I said. "Let me see the plat you're resting this on." Karen tapped her binder. "You'll receive copies at the appropriate time." "I'd like to know which appropriate time you're using," I said. "The county's or yours?" Her mouth flattened. "Ray, don't make this dramatic. We're enforcing for everyone's property values. My grandma's name kept these values up when the porch needed paint," I said. She didn't need a board to tell her how to sweep steps. A screen door creaked down the block. The neighbors had multiplied Peterson from the corner hat in his hands, Mrs. Harris with her mail stuck under one elbow. The wind shifted, carrying a faint chill and the smell of someone's pot roast resting warm in a slow cooker. Dale cleared his throat again louder. "If you refuse voluntary compliance, we may request assistance to remove you from—" "That won't be necessary," I said. I leaned the thermos on the stone post and steadied the paper with my palm. "Just read me the effective date of that notice. Today," he said. "Retroactive to last week's vote." "Retroactive," I said softly, as if the word might break in my hands. "You do like fast clocks." "We have the authority," Karen said. "Authority is a funny thing," I said. "It keeps better when it's bottled by a county and not in someone's kitchen on a Sunday." Her smile pinned itself back on. "We're done here for now," she announced to the watchers. "Formal follow-up will be sent certified." "Send it," I said. "I used to work at the post office. I'll sign for it with the good pen." Karen gave me a look that could have cracked limestone. "Dale, record the refusal." I stepped an inch closer to the gate so the latch cast its shadow across my shoes like a sundial. "I'm not refusing anything. I'm requesting proof." The spoon in the thermos clinked again, steady as a metronome, marking patience. Ray Peterson called softly, "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said, eyes on the paper. "I'm just reading." Dale tilted the notice for me. I read the first paragraph aloud so the neighborhood would hear it from an unshaking voice. "Notice of trespass under revised setback guidance," I said. "Issued to Raymond Colton at address." My breath fogged a little. "I appreciate the courtesy of your copy. We're trying to do this the right way," Karen said softer, as if kindness could be stapled to a form. "Then you'll welcome a second opinion," I said. "From who a lawyer?" Her sunglasses went back on. "From time," I said, and let the quiet take root for a beat. The choir's scales slid down a final amen, floating over roofs. I thought of Grandma's handwriting loops like gentle hills on the day she put my name on the contingency line. "And from documents older than your weekend." Karen stiffened. "You're wasting our time." "Yours, maybe," I said. "Mine's invested." She angled to the neighbors again. "Record that he is refusing inspection." Dale, sweating now, aimed his phone. I aimed mine back. The valley between us filled with a tiny war of lenses. "Nobody trespasses on their own blood," I said loud enough to settle a few shoulders. Karen flinched, but only a blink. "We'll return," she said. "With whatever's required. I look forward to reading it," I said. I unzipped my folder slow the way Grandma used to open a Bible ribbon by ribbon. Halfway out came a photocopy of the Charter Cover County stamp, faint but legible. I didn't offer it yet. I let the edge breathe in the light. "You're sure about your dates?" The back room at the Elm Street post office still smelled like rubber bands and envelopes. I let myself in with a nod to Marcy at the front counter and took the last open desk, the one under the humming fan that always rattled like a loose coin in a dryer. My inbox blinked with the county's reply. Subject R.E. Parcel boundary. 214 North Walnut. One line down it said what I needed it to say. Per recorded records, parcel lines remain unchanged since 2017. Underneath sat a PDF link to the plat. Official, dull, perfect. Marcy leaned around the doorway. "You on your day off again, Ray? Best. Part of retirement?" I said. "I can work anywhere." I clicked print. The laser warmed up with a little ozone whisper. "HOA business?" she asked. "They started it," I said. "I'm just finishing their homework." The machine fed out 3 sheets. The first showed the subdivision with a tidy grid, and my grandmother's lot drawn like a prideful hand had traced it. The second held surveyor notes, initials, dates, and a scale that never blinks. The third was the legend, the kind of page people skip until it saves them. I held the 2017 plat up to the fluorescent light, watching the microprint steady itself. The fan above rattled an extra beat and settled back into its off-kilter rhythm. "Unchanged," I murmured, letting the word land. Out front, a bell chimed and someone dropped a package on the counter. A boy asked for stamps with dogs on them. In that ordinary soundtrack, the stakes sharpened just enough to sting. Karen's glossy binder would be waiting somewhere with a different overlay like a magician recentering a card while you blinked. "Need a highlighter?" Marcy asked, waggling a yellow one through the doorway. "I need a witness," I said, and she grinned. I signed the little log we kept for community prints, wrote County Plat, Public Record, and slipped the pages into a clear sleeve. On the wall beside me, the bulletin board sagged with Lost Cat Notices church rummage sale, dates a flyer for the potluck that always ran out of deviled eggs first. I pinned a note card just below them. Survey copy on file. Ray C. The county email glowed a soft blue on my phone. I read it twice, then again checking the timestamp against the server header. If the HOA wanted a faster clock, they could buy one. The county kept time with ink. The door scraped, and in shuffled Mr. Blaylock with a bundle of utility bills clamped in his fist. He squinted at me. "Heard you got yourself crosswise with the board." "Crosswise with their weekend," I said. "The county's weekday is on my side." He nodded like a man counting nails. "Karen says you're straddling a setback." "Karen says the weather too," I said. "Doesn't mean the clouds listen." He chuckled and shuffled on. I spread the plat across the desk like a placemat for the truth. My finger walked the polyline from the northwest corner to the southeast fence past the little square that marked the outbuilding. 2 feet, they said. 2 feet where my grandmother's hands had never trespassed. I pulled the HOA newsletter Karen left in the mailbox yesterday. Updated setback guidance, it read in bold. No board minutes attached, no county stamp, just a sentence that tried to sound like a gavel. I laid it sideways against the plat and took a photo County versus Clubhouse Inc. versus Layout Software. I copied the PDF to a new folder I labeled Mansion Evidence, then, out of habit, backed it to a thumb drive I'd worn smooth in my pocket. The fan clacked, paused, clacked again, an old metronome coaching patience. "Ray." Marcy's voice came softer now. "You okay?" "I'm okay," I said. "I'm just checking that my feet are where the map says they are." I took a pen and marked 3 tiny X's along the boundary. At each, the surveyor's initials appeared JT and the same date, May 12, 2017. I could almost see the man out there with his prism rod and calm. He didn't know, us didn't care about our choir practices or our bulletin board. He cared about where the earth ended and where it began again. On the last page, a note. Boundary pin reset post-storm per prior recorded coordinate. That was the sentence you build a morning on. I set the HOA newsletter on top and pressed the bundle flat with my palm. "Paper speaks louder than clipboards," I said, and the fan answered with a tired click like it agreed. A mini-crisis arrived in the form of doubt. What if Karen had a second document, something from a friendly surveyor with a looser wrist? I let the feeling pass across my face, then leave like weather. The church down the street loosed a low chord from its organ, a midweek rehearsal that found its way through the vents and into the paper dust. I looked back at the bulletin board, blue pushpins, a flyer for blood pressure screenings, an advertisement for leaf raking. Ordinary life had no patience for the dramatic. It needed mail, delivered checks deposited, past due notices paid. I took another picture of the plat aligned with a printout of Grandma's deed cover page, the one with the county stamp and an embossed feel my thumb could recognize blind. I didn't post any of it to the neighborhood forum, not yet. Spectacle comes cheap. Procedure pays interest. The phone buzzed in my pocket. A neighbor. "You okay, Ray?" I typed back. "Fine, doing my homework." He sent a thumbs-up emoji and a photo of his dog asleep in the sun, which is the kind of proof a man really needs sometimes. I slid the plat into a thicker sleeve and labeled it with a sticky note to review ink and emboss. The fan wobbled and clacked. I imagined Karen's sunglasses reflecting a copy room light, Dale's clipboard catching the glow, all of it staged to look official enough if no one looked too long. I looked long. I always have. "Marcy, I called you got any of those certified mail stickers?" She stepped in and set a small strip on the desk. "You sending or expecting?" "Expecting," I said, "and sending eventually." I tucked the sticker into my wallet like a promise. Then I opened a new text thread and typed to the only person I trusted to read paper like a pulse. Bring your ink loop. Grandpa Elias didn't knock, he never has. The door creaked and he came in with a scuffed leather binder tucked under his arm like a weapon he'd carried since the Depression. He set it down on my kitchen table hard enough to make the salt shaker jump. "Ray," he said, "you've been reading emails. Time to read paper." I looked at the binder. Its corners chewed its spine, rubbed pale. Inside lay the deed yellowed embossed breathing with the dust of a courthouse basement. "They served me a notice," I said, sliding the HOA letter across. The bold trespass stamped across the top looked less official under my own ceiling light. Elias pulled a cloth from his pocket and polished his glasses slow like he was preparing for cross-examination in church. He didn't speak until he'd set them back on his nose. The pause said more than any argument. "I've seen this language before," he muttered, flipping the pages with dry fingers. "Vague, threatening, and wrong." He pointed at the seal on Grandma's deed. "This, however, is the county's own wax. They don't undo that with a newsletter." I poured him iced tea. He ignored it, staring at the embossed circle like it was a sermon. The faint drift of the church choir's rehearsal floated through the open window. Alto lines rose, then hushed, as if listening in. He jabbed one clause with his thumb. "Here. Occupancy rights extend to direct descendants. That's you, Ray. Not negotiable." The casserole dish Mrs. Harris had left me sat cooling on the counter cheese, crisping at the edges. Elias sniffed once, then turned another page. His silence was the sharpest cross-examiner I knew. I unfolded the HOA warning notice beside the deed. "They taped this to the gate," I said. "Like I was a kid caught cutting across lawns." He skimmed it, grunted. "Signatures shaky. No county reference. Ray, they want you to back off because they're loud, not because they're right." I leaned closer, voice low. "What if they drag me into court? Then we walk in with this binder," Elias said, snapping it shut. "Paper that weighs more than their clipboards." I nodded, but the doubt itched. "Karen's got half the neighborhood thinking I'm a squatter. Then half the neighborhood will eat humble pie," he said, standing to leave. His hands lingered on the binder as if feeling Grandma's pulse in the leather. A knock tapped at the screen door. My neighbor Dale's cousin stuck his head in. "Ray folks are saying you should step back before this gets ugly." The words landed like grit in a wound. Step back. From my grandmother's table, from her house, from the gate she painted every spring, I watched Elias tuck the binder under his arm again. The choir's hymn swelled one note higher, and the casserole dish cracked softly as the cheese cooled. The porch was still dripping with dew when the camera feed blinked on my laptop. I rubbed sleep from my eyes, rewound, and froze the grainy clip at 03:15. There, clear as the pie box left on the counter, was a hand in the dark, nudging the iron boundary pin like a guilty finger pushing time back. For a moment I only heard the porch swing creak outside, steady as a clock. Then I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. So that's how they meant to erase us. I texted Sheriff Dan, attaching the still frame. His reply came quick. "Package looks solid. Be ready to present." The words buzzed in my hand like an electric fence. Elias came by just after sunrise, pie box under his arm, the kind the diner wrapped in white twine. He didn't comment on the footage right away. He just set the box down, cut himself a wedge, and chewed while staring at the frozen hand on my laptop screen. "Whoever that is," he said finally, "just moved your fight from rumor to record." I slid over the draft document. Dan had sent me a temporary trespass restraining order, the county seal faint but present at the top. The edges shook as I held it. "Still feels thin," I said. Elias shook his head. "Not when you pair paper with pixels." He tapped the screen. Courts love timestamps. 3:15 a.m. is a confession all by itself. The porch swing creaked again, slow arcs marking the silence. Out by the lake, gulls dipped. The quiet stretched until Elias leaned back. "Ray, you're not proving innocence anymore. You're proving intent." By noon, I was at the post office bulletin board, crowded with yard sale flyers. I pinned a copy of the HOA's own notice beside the county email from last week, dates circled in red. Folks stopped to look. No words exchanged, but I caught the way their eyes lingered on the mismatch. One old man pointed at the circled dates, shook his head, and muttered, "Shameful." That was echo enough. Back at the house, I pulled the still frame onto paper grainy but clear, the bent wrist the shove on the pin. Beside it, I clipped the TTRO draft and the certified envelope from the county. A package now, something heavier than accusation. Elias watched from the porch glasses glinting. He said nothing, just rocked as if the swing's rhythm carried the weight of years of courtroom benches. When the text from Dan came again, "Package looks solid. Be ready to present." I felt the shift inside me, from defense to declaration. That night, under a low lamp, I whispered the line to myself as if practicing testimony, "Truth waits until 3:15, and the stack of papers beside me seemed to nod in agreement. The county would hear it. Soon. The courthouse steps held the kind of chill that seeps into coffee cups. People gathered in clusters. Neighbors, clerks, a few reporters waiting to hear whether paper or pride would carry the day. Above us, the Monroe County flag flapped lazily, stitching its shadow across the limestone facade. The mediator climbed the stairs. Navy blazer crisp against the gray stone, a manila folder tucked like a hymn book under her arm. She tapped the mic clipped to her lapel. Voice steady but never loud. "This session concerns petition number 24-3177, she began. Colton versus HOA Board. Request for temporary injunction. Elias shifted his binder under one elbow. I stood next to him, my grandmother's name written on more than one page inside that folder, though she wasn't here to see it. Karen was though front row arms, folded sunglasses pulled low. Dale beside her pretending to take notes on a clipboard that had seen more theater than facts. The mediator read carefully. The court finds sufficient cause to grant interim relief. Effective immediately, the HOA is enjoined from taking any action affecting possession or control of the Colton property at 214 North Walnut. It wasn't loud, but the words carried further than any gavel. Coffee lids froze halfway to lips. The flag cracked once like punctuation. Karen broke first. "You can't simply void our authority." The mediator looked over her glasses. "Authority continues where procedure holds. At present, procedure is absent." A neighbor snorted softly. Someone hushed him. Elias leaned toward me. "Ink's still wet, but it's binding," he whispered. He had the calm of a man who'd measured twice and now watched the cut fall in his favor. Sheriff Dan came up 2 steps, hat in his hand, and passed me a clear sleeve. Inside, the injunction order bore a fresh, embossed stamp. Behind it, a small canvas pouch rattled. "Keys," he said. "New locks fitted this morning." The phrase felt heavier than its syllables. Paper in one hand, metal in the other, the twin instruments of possession. Karen tried again. "We'll appeal, you may," the mediator said, "but appeals don't open doors." Dan gestured toward the cruiser. "Shall we?" The drive back through Bloomington felt different, though the same streets rolled past brick storefronts, the diner with its blue awning, the post office bulletin board packed with flyers. Yet, in my lap, the injunction glowed like a lantern. Words clear and deliberate status quo preserved authority suspended. At the mansion gate, neighbors had gathered not as protesters, but as witnesses. Mrs. Harris held an empty casserole carrier, polished clean, like she knew the occasion deserved something washed and ready. Peterson removed his cap the way he did at choir practice. The for sale sign Karen had planted still leaned in the grass ribbon missing stake crooked. The absence of applause was its own kind of applause. Elias loosened the drawstring and slid a key into his palm. Ordinary brass, brand new shine. He studied it as though it had waited years to meet his hand. Karen stormed up the walk. "This is harassment. I demand access." Dan lifted the injunction sleeve so the seal caught afternoon light. "This says otherwise." Dale raised his little body cam. Noted residents obstructing board oversight. His voice trailed as if even the camera doubted him. Elias turned to me. "Ray, you do it. It's your name on the line now." I shook my head. "Grandma trusted your hands first." They built the latch. They should finish the turn. He looked at me for a long beat, then stepped to the gate. The old lock gave one last sigh as he removed the worn key. He slipped it into his pocket with the care you give a relic, not junk. Then he fitted the new one. Around us, the sounds thinned. A distant lawnmower idling down a bird startled into silence. Even Karen's protests quieted, swallowed by the porch hush. The key turned. Click. Not loud, but true. Locks remember what papers decide. Neighbors exhaled together. It wasn't cheers, yet it was steadier, like a hymn hummed before words catch. Mrs. Harris smiled down at her casserole tin. Peterson muttered, "About time," under his breath. Karen pressed forward, but the metal tongue had already seated. She yanked the handle. It didn't budge. Dan's voice cut across the moment. From this moment, he said, even and clear, access denied. The phrase settled heavier than any padlock. For the first time since this started, Karen had no words. Dale's pen hovered above paper, but he didn't write. Elias withdrew the key, tested the handle again, then dropped the brass back into the pouch. He handed it to Dan. "Keep a spare at the station just in case." Dan nodded. Under seal. The flag overhead rustled again as if the county itself sighed relief. And in that brief hush, coffee steam fading, casserole carriers. Empty choir voices warming in the church across town, I felt something shift. Not victory, not yet. But the ground had tilted, and the locks had chosen their side. The courthouse steps held the kind of chill that seeps into coffee cups. People gathered in clusters, neighbors, clerks, a few reporters waiting to hear whether paper or pride would carry the day. Above us, the Monroe County flag flapped lazily, stitching its shadow across the limestone facade. The mediator climbed the stairs, navy blazer crisp against the gray stone, a manila folder tucked like a hymn book under her arm. She tapped the mic, clipped to her lapel voice, steady but never loud. "This session concerns petition number 24 to 3117, she began. Colton versus HOA Board. Request for temporary injunction. Elias shifted his binder under one elbow. I stood next to him, my grandmother's name written on more than one page inside that folder, though she wasn't here to see it. Karen was the front row arms, folded sunglasses pulled low. Dale beside her, pretending to take notes on a clipboard that had seen more theater than facts. The mediator read carefully. The court finds sufficient cause to grant interim relief. Effective immediately, the HOA is enjoined from taking any action affecting possession or control of the Colton property at 214 North Walnut. It wasn't loud, but the words carried further than any gavel. Coffee lids froze halfway to lips. The flag cracked once like punctuation. Karen broke first. You can't simply void our authority. The mediator looked over her glasses. Authority continues where procedure holds. At present, procedure is absent. A neighbor snorted softly. Someone hushed him. Elias leaned toward me. Ink's still wet, but it's binding, he whispered. He had the calm of a man who'd measured twice and now watched the cut fall in his favor. Sheriff Dan came up 2 steps, hat in his hand, and passed me a clear sleeve. Inside, the injunction order bore a fresh embossed stamp. Behind it, a small canvas pouch rattled. Keys, he said. New locks fitted this morning. The phrase felt heavier than its syllables. Paper in one hand, metal in the other, the twin instruments of possession. Karen tried again. We'll appeal, Yume the mediator said. But appeals don't open doors. Dan gestured toward the cruiser. Shall we? The drive back through Bloomington felt different, though the same streets rolled past brick storefronts, the diner with its blue awning, the post office bulletin board packed with flyers. Yet, in my lap, the injunction glowed like a lantern. Words clear and deliberate, status quo preserved, authority suspended. At the mansion gate, neighbors had gathered not as protesters, but as witnesses. Mrs. Harris held an empty casserole carrier, polished clean, like she knew the occasion deserved something washed and ready. Peterson removed his cap the way he did at choir practice. The for sale sign Karen had planted still leaned in the grass ribbon, missing stake crooked. The absence of applause was its own kind of applause. Elias loosened the drawstring and slid a key into his palm. Ordinary brass, brand new shine. He studied it as though it had waited years to meet his hand. Karen stormed up the walk. "This is harassment. I demand access." Dan lifted the injunction sleeve so the seal caught afternoon light. "This says otherwise." Dale raised his little body cam, noted residents obstructing board oversight. His voice trailed as if even the camera doubted him. Elias turned to me. "Ray, you do it. It's your name on the line now." I shook my head. "Grandma trusted your hands first. They built the latch. They should finish the turn." He looked at me for a long beat, then stepped to the gate. The old lock gave one last sigh as he removed the worn key. He slipped it into his pocket with the care you give a relic, not junk. Then he fitted the new one. Around us, the sounds thinned. A distant lawnmower idling down a bird startled into silence. Even Karen's protests quieted, swallowed by the porch hush. The key turned. Click. Not loud, but true. Locks remember what papers decide. Neighbors exhaled together. It wasn't cheers yet. It was steadier, like a hymn hummed before words catch, Mrs. Harris smiled down at her casserole tin. Peterson muttered, "About time," under his breath. Karen pressed forward, but the metal tongue had already seated. She yanked the handle. It didn't budge. Dan's voice cut across the moment. From this moment, he said even and clear, access denied. The phrase settled heavier than any padlock. For the first time since this started, Karen had no words. Dale's pen hovered above paper, but he didn't write. Elias withdrew the key, tested the handle again, then dropped the brass back into the pouch. He handed it to Dan. "Keep a spare at the station, just in case." Dan nodded. Under seal. The flag overhead rustled again as if the county itself sighed relief. And in that brief hush, coffee steam fading. Casserole carriers, empty choir voices warming in the church across town, I felt something shift. Not victory, not yet. But the ground had tilted, and the locks had chosen their side. The church hall carried the smell of casseroles and waxed linoleum, the kind of mix only community suppers and election nights manage. Folding chairs formed tidy rows, each dent speaking of long sermons and choir rehearsals. On the bulletin board, beside flyers for a choir bake sale and a note about free blood pressure screenings, hung a binder labeled Audit, HOA, Fees, and Fines. Its plastic spine gleamed under the fluorescent tubes of public record no one could wave away. Elias rested his scuffed binder on the table at the front. Next to it sat the injunction in its sleeve, the seal visible a quiet authority. Karen and the two remaining board members stood off to one side, posture stiff, but voices absent. Sheriff Dan leaned against the wall near the coffee urn hat tucked behind him, letting his presence speak more than words. Neighbors streamed in casseroles and coffee cups in hand. A tray of baked ziti steamed at the back. Someone had set out a potato salad that looked like it had been brought to every church picnic for 30 years. Programs rustled. The room filled with the soft murmur of anticipation. Elias tapped the mic. It squeaked once. "Thank you for coming. We'll keep this plain. Names are blacked out on the posted copy for privacy, but the numbers are visible. No tricks." He flipped the binder open and clipped a sheet to a stand. Line after line listed fines. Porch swing placement holiday lights left past January 10th, wheelbarrow storage, each followed by dollar signs. A second column read, "Credit due." Karen exhaled hard. "We acted for standards," she muttered. "Standards require minutes," Elias replied. He tapped the space on the page where board approvals should have been recorded but weren't. I stepped forward with a stack of checks the bank had cut that morning, rectangles of paper that weighed more than their sums. "Row by row," I said. "If your name is called, sign and collect your refund. If you're not listed, fill out a form and we'll amend." The first to rise was Mrs. Peterson. Her hands shook as she accepted a check for the unapproved bench color fee. She pressed it to her chest, then whispered a thank you that sounded like prayer. Next came Mr. Blaylock, red-faced as he received a refund for decorative wagon placement. He muttered, "Guess the wagon stays," and the room chuckled gently. Paper rustled with each name. Then silence settled again, heavy but not hostile. Above us, the choir rehearsed a hymn, the alto line drifting down the stairwell like smoke curling in the rafters. Elias read aloud. Line item 47. Caretaker reassignment surcharge. No bylaw basis. He pointed to a margin where Grandma's handwriting once underlined the clause granting occupancy rights. That deed clause echoed here, transformed from private ink into public law. Karen raised her chin. "We preserved order. You preserved receipts," Elias answered. His tone wasn't cruel, just final. Coffee was poured into foam cups, steam clouding glasses. Neighbors flipped through handouts, lips moving as they read. Each number circled back to the same truth the board had collected what it never had the right to take. Mrs. Harris approached when her name was called. Her refund, a fee for seasonal garland noncompliance. She accepted the check and lingered a moment. Her eyes shone not from the dollar amount, but from the reversal itself. I leaned close. Justice tastes like refunded checks. She laughed, one tear falling, and the phrase carried across the aisle as if someone had repeated it louder. Several heads nodded. One by one, neighbors came forward. The table filled with signatures, checks exchanged, relief recorded. The final tally sheet was pinned to the bulletin board beside the binder. Pushpins bit the cork, the paper flapped once, and the room held still. That hush, the silent beat, lasted long enough for everyone to know this wasn't bookkeeping. It was reckoning. Applause rose, not explosive, but sure. People clapped for each other, not against Karen. The board's second member stepped forward, face pale. "We regret the distress caused." He said the words awkward, but real. For the first time, Karen didn't answer. She just stared at the floor. I called the last names. The numbers marched upward until the running total showed every misused dollar accounted for. Phones came out. Neighbors took pictures of the bulletin board, the refund line, the seal. Not to gloat, to remember. Dan added quietly, "If any liens remain recorded off these fees, come see me. We'll have the county clear them." His voice was like the final brush of a broom on a clean floor. Mrs. Harris stood with her check, then leaned close. Her whisper threaded the air. "We're free of her." That single line worked like a bell rung over the crowd. Not everyone heard. Yet everyone did. The hush broke into applause again. Louder, steadier. Folding everyone into its rhythm. Elias closed his binder with a muted thump. He didn't smile much, he simply let the corners of his mouth rest like a man who'd waited long enough to see justice set down in black ink. He glanced once more at the bulletin board. The deed's echo was present, even if no one named it. Grandma's claws had carried all the way to this casserole-scented hall. Above us, the choir bell signaled rehearsal's end. People gathered casserole tins, folded programs, and carried coffee cups to the bin. The baked ziti was half-gone potato salad nearly finished. It looked like any other church gathering except for the checks tucked into coat pockets, proof of a wrong reversed. The echo would ripple outward. Tonight it was a church hall. Tomorrow it would be the whole neighborhood. The lawn smelled of smoke and hickory, the unmistakable perfume of a Saturday barbecue. Neighbors clustered with paper plates balanced on palms, children chasing each other near the fence. At the center, by the flagpole that had watched every season, the mediator arranged her folder on a lectern borrowed from the church. The transfer order lay inside a clear sleeve, its embossed seal glinting as though it had waited years for this moment. She adjusted her glasses. "By order of Monroe County Court," she began. "Title is affirmed in the Colton estate. The caretaker designation stands. All encumbrances filed by the HOA are hereby dissolved." Her tone was plain, but the weight pressed across the grass like a steady hand. A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone lowered their fork. Another set down a coleslaw bowl. Wind cracked the flag overhead 1, 2, 3 beats, and then quiet returned, expectant and thick. The mediator held out the sleeve. I accepted it. the paper warm against my palms, cooler where the seal caught shadow. Elias nudged me toward the iron boundary pin still resting shallow in the earth near the gate. "Go on," he said. His voice had gravel in it, but also pride. I crouched, brushing dirt from the pin's head. For months it had been contested, nudged, lifted, doubted. Now it slid back into its socket like memory reclaiming a place. My palm pressed it firm. The crowd hushed. Children stilled. The earth accepted the weight as if it had been waiting all along. Sheriff Dan stepped forward with the canvas pouch. Keys rattled faintly inside, brass polished new. He placed them in my hand. "These open what the paper already decided," he said. I held them up. Light glanced from their teeth. Her house stood. I said softly, steady as the flag's shadow across the lawn. So did we. A murmur traveled the crowd, agreement spoken not with words but with shoulders relaxing, heads nodding. The hush broke into applause, gentle, first then steady. Someone lifted a tray of cornbread high as if to toast the phrase. 2 teenagers in choir jackets carried an easel to the porch steps. A cloth fell away to reveal the plaque, Grandma's House Community Heritage, in honor of Margaret Colton and the quiet courage that keeps a street a home. The bronze caught the sun, sending it back in a warm blaze. The sound of clapping rose, folding everyone into the moment. Children craned their necks. Mrs. Harris pressed her hand to her chest. Peterson wiped the corner of his eye with the back of his cap. Karen stood near the sidewalk, shoulders hunched. Without her sunglasses, her face looked smaller. She did not speak. A board member beside her whispered something close to apology, words I couldn't catch. She did not answer. Neighbors leaned closer to read the plaque. Phones came out, photos snapped, not for bragging but for keeping. The words glinted like the pin in the earth, like the seal in the transfer order evidence hammered into metal, no longer fragile. Elias tapped the plaque with a knuckle. "We'll mount it straight after brisket," he said. His mouth didn't smile, but his eyes did. We set the transfer order inside the hall under the row of coat hooks where Grandma used to hang her gardening jacket. Outside, the celebration continued in ordinary sounds, spatulas clinking on the grill, lemonade, ice, cracking laughter stretching across picnic tables. Normal life returned, layered over justice like icing over a cake suite, but never hiding the structure beneath. At dusk, the plaque was drilled into brick level and certain. The minister said a brief blessing, thanking rather than crowning. Applause swelled again, louder, longer, then tapered into quiet as the flag shifted once more in the twilight breeze. Neighbors began to gather casserole dishes, fold lawn chairs, and stack cups. Children licked barbecue sauce from their hands, sneaking one last glance at the plaque. Dan raised the pouch again. "Station holds a coded spare," he announced. "But the only keys that count belong here." He gestured to my pocket. Karen turned at last. She walked toward the street, paused, once glanced back, not at me, but at the plaque. Then she left, swallowed by the evening. In her place, laughter filled the gap. Elias lowered himself onto the porch step, the scuffed binder on his knee. "You hear it?" he asked. "The flag," I said. "No, the quiet that belongs here." We sat. The porch swing accepted us with a creak swaying in its familiar rhythm. I set the keys beside the transfer order on the little table. The brass gleamed next to the paper, each confirming the other. The swing's wood sighed again, a single note. I listened to it, weighing the cost of peace. For the first time in years, I believed I could pay it in full. The lawn quieted after the applause, the flag above us snapping once more in the late light and the fresh plaque catching gold along its edge. Holding the restored keys in my pocket, I felt the weight of order returned as sure as the pin I'd driven back into the soil. That simple ceremony, transfer order read, seal. Witnessed applause shared, reminded us that mistakes on paper can be corrected and that neighbors can outlast fear. When wrongs are faced, fences mend and hearts follow. Legacy is not just a deed, but the people who choose to honor it. Justice isn't loud, it's steady. Share your HOA story below your map, might help someone redraw theirs.